Welcome, my colleagues and friends from the United States and actually around the world. My name is Richard Brecht, and I'll be moderating the session. The session's name is America's Language Initiative Addressing an Existential Threat to Language Education Programs in the U.S. The context I will lay out, and I encourage you, if you have questions, please ask them. But this is a uniquely U.S. situation that I will be describing, but put it in the context of the recent joint call by academies of sciences from Australia, the UK, US, and Canada, showing it is a global problem, at least particularly for English-speaking countries. But let me first, before I begin, let me introduce you to my colleagues and the agenda. I will be giving an overview. I'm the co-director of American Council's Research Center at the American Councils for International Education in Washington, D.C., and I'm also the co-founder of Genie.com, a language interpretation company. Following me will be Dr. Bill Rivers, who's the principal of W.P. Rivers and Associates, an established and internationally recognized policy expert on language. He's also a wonderful linguist in Russian and Central Asian languages, and he has been an associate of mine for many, many years. Following that, we will focus on our primary point that we're making. It has to do with access, and particularly we're looking today at Native American languages. We have two wonderful representatives of those communities. Leslie Harper is president of the National Coalition of Native American Language Schools and Programs. She is a national voice for Native American and American Indian languages in the United States. And she has connections and has brought this expertise to this program in remarkable ways. Following her will be Dr. William Wilson. His Hawaiian sobriquet is, and he's a professor of linguistics at Hawaiian at Kahaka Uo Ke'elikolani, sorry, Bill, State Hawaiian Language College at the University of Hawaii at Hilo. And finally, following these, we will have Rita Oleksak, who's the director of languages and English language learning at Glastonbury Public Schools, which is one of our remarkable exemplary programs. And she is also president of our kind of global or our overriding language organization in the United States, Joint National Committee for Languages. So I would like to begin, I will end, we will come back to a demonstration of our guide to exemplary programs and practices in U.S. language education. I will follow my colleagues and return to this, and then we will open it up for a broader conversation. But let me proceed just with an overview and an introduction. What we're trying to do with this notion of America's Languages Initiative, we're looking at a systemic change in the way language education is perceived and implemented in this country. We want to move from what is traditionally an elitist posture for language education to focus on equal and equitable access to marginalized bilinguals and disadvantaged monolingual learners. And this is a critical and quite unprecedented initiative in this country. The rationale for this is very straightforward. Enrollments in this country have been static for 50 years, approximately 20% in K-12 and 8% in higher education. We believe that this is due to the fact that we have not paid enough attention to accessibility and relevance to all potential learners in this country. And now with COVID and the reductions across the humanities and in language, we believe that now is the time where we need and we have the opportunity to make a systemic change in language education. And that systemic change revolves around access to effective instruction in all of America's languages. By access, what do we mean? We mean full and equal access to the nation's marginalized bilinguals. Those are Native American, heritage, immigrant, and refugee communities. So they can have access to effective English learning and to programs ensuring literacy and proficiency in the language of their home, tribe, or community. That's what we mean by full access. We also mean full and equal access for bilingual, indigenous, and people of color, and all economic disadvantaged learners in rural and inner city communities in many more of America's languages. And finally, this full and equal access has to be to effective programs that provide the abilities relevant to the needs and desires of our language. So what do we mean by America's languages? Well, we mean by that languages are a part of what we are and what we have been in this country, whether they're indigenous peoples, colonial settlers, immigrants, or immigrant arrivals, adopters of languages around the globe, or deaf signers. Those are all of America's languages. We sometimes call them foreign, we sometimes call them native, we call them many things, but they are, in our sense, America's languages. We do this to recognize multilingualism as essentially inherent to these United States. And it's an acknowledgement of our diversity. And we do this also to promote more learning and preservation of these languages. Who are we, basically? Who is doing this is a group of people called the America's Languages Working Group. It's an unprecedented collaboration of educators and stakeholders from academe, business, government, Native American, heritage, immigrant, and refugee communities, and NGOs with a global or international or educational mission. All of these people are volunteering their time. They're not being paid, and the organization has no formal organizational structure per se, and is bound together only by the goals and recommendations of a report by the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2017 called America's Languages, Investing in Language Education for the 21st Century. The fellows, not only this working group is the primary organizing element, but we are joined by America's Languages Fellows. These are distinguished teachers, administrators, researchers who know programs and practices that can serve as exemplars of access and excellence in the United States. They are charged with identifying these exemplars wherever they may be, notwithstanding whether they're small or large. And that we're dependent on this cadre of experts. We have over 150 of them across the country in all of these educational levels and representing all the stakeholders in this country. What I'm going to do, I'm going to stop now. I will come back, and I would like to actually display this online guide to exemplary programs and practices in the United States. That's a public website. It identifies and describes these programs, serving as models for teachers, administrators, and funders, particularly meeting the needs of these marginalized bilingual communities and disadvantaged populations. Okay, I will come back to demonstrate that, but for the time being now, I'd like to turn it over to my good colleague, Bill Rivers, to give some background on this initiative.
Thank you, Dick, and thank you, Rita, Pila, and Leslie for this panel, and to Linda Egnatz and Global C.R.E.D for asking us to do this. We're at an interesting time, as Dick says. You know, we're in this massive global pandemic. We can see the light at the end of the tunnel. We know it's the actual end of the tunnel and not an on-rushing train. We have a long ways to go. We know there's going to be a lot of fallout, a lot of damage to educational systems, and that will take a while to work itself out because of the economic collapse, because of the loss of learning that we've seen for almost a full year now. So it's an interesting time, a challenging time, but also a time of opportunity. I'm here to give just a brief discussion of the background of this initiative, and Dick Dick framed that to start. In 2013, we saw a national summit at the University of Maryland, Languages for All. We saw the publication of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences Commission on the Humanities and Social Sciences report called Humanities for All. And we also saw the British Academy, which is an analogous group in the United Kingdom, publish its report, its parliamentarily requested report on the parlous state of languages in the UK. And we were looking at that saying, well, it's been a while since we've had a commission in the US. The 1979 President's Commission on Foreign Languages and International Studies. So the Joint National Committee for Languages, which I had the honor of leading at the time, and ACTFL and a number of other organizations banded together to go lobby Congress to get a request for another commission to answer basic questions. It was an astonishing request where a bipartisan group of senators and representatives said flatly that languages matter to America's national interest. English is no longer sufficient as a lingua franca, neither at home nor abroad. And how can we do better with the resources we have, understanding the fiscal constraints and the political constraints at the time? That led to the commission, funded by a number of small grants from foundations that the American Academy of Arts and Sciences was able to put together, and then to the publication of the report, as Dick said, in February of 2017, which then had the establishment of this working group. So there are 5 recommendations in the report. There's a global recommendation that says we need to do better. We need to increase access to language learning for all of America's languages. The report, as Dick said, it's America's languages. We weren't calling it foreign languages, and we wanted to be deliberately inclusive, intentionally inclusive. The working group has these 5 recommendations, plus this: we need more access for everyone, which drives us all. We need to have more people learning, transmitting, retaining their languages. And then the specific recommendations were that 1, we need more teachers. 2, we need to do better for Native American languages. 3, we need to do better for heritage languages. 4, we need to do better for study abroad. Now I'm missing one. Partnerships. Yes, we have 5. We have to find new and innovative ways to fund our programs. Those are really not recommendations. It's not, the Department of Education should increase this funding line by a certain amount, or that there should be a deputy assistant secretary of something over in the Department of Defense. They're really strategic visions. And so the working group had to figure out how to actually change things, how to move the needle. We've done a number of things. We've had 2 statewide, US-based calls to action. We've had op-eds published by people like former Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta, and those are all very helpful. The commission's report and the subsequent calls to action have been cited more than 30 times in bills proposed by different congressmen and senators in the congressional record on the floor of the Senate or the House. And then just 2 days ago, we had a global call to action from 4 countries, 4 primarily Anglophone countries: the US, the UK, Canada, and Australia. But all of that is a public face. And so we figured that if we want to get to real change, we have to show that these recommendations are in fact achievable, they're feasible. And something that I think all of us have learned from our roles in language and the language enterprise in the United States, some of us going back a very long time, Dr. Brecht, that in fact, people are doing this, mostly at the grassroots level, often without any help from the federal government, often in facing opposition from the state or local government, or having to convince a school board or a principal that in fact this can be done and that this is tremendously important for our students. So this guide allows us to show that feasibility, to connect other people who might want to do the same thing, whether that's a new study abroad program, whether that's something that leads towards the survival and revival of a Native American language, but also then to go back to the funders, the major philanthropic interests, to the Congress, to state legislatures, and say, look, this is doable, and you guys need to sign on, and not to, and we're not creating this out of whole cloth. When we look at the growth of the seal of biliteracy, and the language educator, I just got it yesterday, points out that we have the seal of biliteracy in 40 states plus the district, and the 10 remaining states are working on it. So this is for Linda and company and the others listening on the seal. You got to now have to work on the other 5 territories, okay? We got to get complete. But it's grassroots initiative. It's grassroots effort. We have people in America, and we've done research on this for years, support language learning and want to see their children have that opportunity to become biliterate and bilingual. And unfortunately, as Dick noted, that opportunity is most often available based on your zip code, based on the demographics and the socioeconomic status of your school district. Not always, and there are plenty of exceptions to that rule, but we know that we need to do better. And so I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to people who actually know what they're talking about. My colleague and friend, Leslie Harper, from the Leech Lake Band of the Ojibwe, and she's going to talk about her experiences and let us know more. Leslie.
Miigwech folks, Akawedash, Kiwi, Anamikunanim, Ginawa sa Igaego, Giwi Miigwechiwi Inanim, Patako Shinego Masa, Nina sa Leslie Harper, Igaego, Omasa ga Gamasqua Kokog, Indunchiba, Mi Omasa Nini Bout, Nongom, Igaego, Niminwendan, Wabamanagug, Ginawa, Nongom. I am Leslie Harper, and as Bill said, I'm an enrolled member of the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe, and I'm really happy to be here on the screen with my colleagues who are from all around the country. I'm coming here today from my homelands, the Leech Lake Reservation. I'm in north central Minnesota, and it's just, I'm really grateful to you folks for coming together to talk about this stuff today, and for folks who are out there joining in on this and who are as well interested and concerned about these ideas with our languages. And just thank you very much for being here. When we started talking, I'm a member of the America's Language Working Group, as Dick and Bill have said. When we started to participate in this, we said, what are we going to do with this report? And the working group came together and said, how do we carry out these action calls, right? This action call. And as all of these different stakeholders in our working group came together, we keep talking about access to languages. We want to make sure that every learner in America has an opportunity to be learning languages, right? But it's one thing to talk about it. What does that really mean? I've been a public policy person, and I've worked in K-12 education, and then also have many partnerships with some preschool and with post-secondary as well. That's how my language trajectory, that's how my involvement in language revitalization has come about, really looking at it from a cradle to grave perspective, is that languages play a really important part in our lives. So what we talk about is there are so many different situations and across the U.S. regarding our Native American languages. We have over 570 federally recognized tribes. We have Alaska Native communities. We have Native Hawaiian communities. And it's important to understand that when we say Native American languages, that is a legal definition. That is a legal definition in federal law in many places. And the term Native American languages encompasses all of the tribal languages of this area, as well as Alaska Native languages and Hawaiian Native language. So we have a whole corpus of law behind us, that supports us. And so we use the term Native American language as this kind of this catch-all category, because it shows how our communities come together and some of the similarities. But it also is a definition. As a legal definition, it gives us some weight, and it gives us some legal standing, and it gives us a chance to talk about accessing our rights to speak our languages on our homelands here in this country and anywhere we go, and then also sharing those languages with everybody else who enters our lands. So it's a perspective that we need to keep in mind here in America when we talk about America's languages. It's an amazingly broad perspective, but sometimes it gets overlooked, the original languages of this country. So there have been pockets of persistence out here in Native American language revitalization, because it's also important to note that many of our languages are endangered. Many of our languages here in the US have been subsumed by English, by American English, and by that. So there are some areas that are working diligently, persistently to revitalize and to maintain and to promote our Native American languages as languages of communication and as languages of, power, as languages of, basic communication and understanding. We formed in 2014, we formed another volunteer group called the National Coalition of Native American Language Schools and Programs that brings together a group of folks from around the US who are using a Native American language as the primary language of instruction in an educational setting. And we have members in states all across the US and probably about 17 different Native American languages right now. And they're all in different levels of development. And it's about, there are some that are preschools, there are some that are elementary schools, and a very few have expanded into a whole high school and post-secondary setting in which they're able to do educational efforts in a Native American language instead of doing it in English. And it's a capacity matter, really. A lot of our tribal, our Native American languages, our Native American language communities are small. And the number of people who are, working to build their languages and who are working to learn their languages and transfer it, it's a really small number. We end up being a little small subpopulation of the small population of Native Americans in the United States already. So there are folks, our colleagues are working, doing heroic efforts on the daily. They're doing this for years and they are doing this for decades to ensure that our languages carry on in the settings in our communities. But like I said, it's really a capacity building initiative for a lot of us in Native American language communities. So when we start looking at this America's Language Report and the recommendations, we say, for real, how to build capacity. We need to increase the number of teachers at all levels. We can say that about every language in the United States, but this is a pressing need here in Native American language communities. We need to continue to build more partnerships, just as Bill was saying. And I mean, really talking about targeted support and really talking about opportunities for students to learn these languages. What's it going to take? So we all know we want earlier access to languages. We don't want it to just happen as a 1 or 2 credit course in high school. It's great if we can get earlier access to languages and to our Native American languages. That means we need to train more teachers. We need to provide more settings in the community that support this. We need to align instructional practices with all kind of assessment practices, and in the K through 12 ed law, we need to ensure that there's equal prioritization for education in a student's language and assessment in assessments. We need to provide credits for languages, which is what many of our communities are doing. They work within the state that they're in. They work within the framework of all of the rights that Congress, has said are available to us, we then need to go and talk about how does it look to provide credit for Native American languages as a world language credit. And many more states have been stepping up and doing this, but 20 years ago, you would have been hard pressed to find a state that accepted a Native American language as a world language credit for graduation. And then we have to talk about, we need to also build capacity just in these spaces for folks to understand how language learning intersects with other content areas and complements and supports learning in all these other areas, right? So not just a language class sitting there on the side, but how can we provide, support for learning math, science, literacy with these bilingual and these Native American language programs? How do we integrate community language practices into all learning? So those are really important pieces to talk about. And this is what our folks in Native American language revitalization communities work on, whether they're working with the smallest babies up to age 5, whether they're working in a K through 12 school setting, or whether they're in a post-secondary setting, working on their own languages to build that up and to pass it on to the next generation. These are difficult, really difficult endeavors due to a small number of folks doing this. So we really appreciate highlighting this and talking about what does it take to access our languages for us on our own homelands. We have a lot to build up, and it's been really, really great to be able to work with these other folks. Before I really appreciated the piece in the America's Languages report that talks about America's languages being a pressing national need, because that is a really, really important piece, and we should not let languages slide. And for those of us in Native American language communities, it truly, truly does become a pressing national need to our Native nations, to our communities, when our languages are this endangered and we have so much left to build up. So understanding languages as a pressing national need from the perspective of one of these language communities is a really important piece to hold up. I appreciate your folks' just willingness to bring this up. I've talked very broadly about the activities, and we have with us today William Wilson, Dr. William Wilson, one of my colleagues in the National Coalition and in Native American language revitalization work. He can talk specifically about some of the very active and successful steps forward that are being taken with a Native American language community. Pila?
Mahalo nui loa e Leslie a me ka poia pau I ako ko mai nei ke ia la no ke kumuana koi o ka malama ana I na olelo o Amerika. Thank you so much, Leslie, and everyone listening for this really important topic that we're talking about as America's languages, and there are a whole lot of them. For Native American languages, over 200 different languages native to the United States. Here in Hawaii, we have the most developed effort in language revitalization. The big problem for Native American languages is actual life or death. So we depend on our efforts to maintain the languages for the very survival of these languages. And Hawaiian has a history of the language disappearing rather quickly compared to some of the other languages, such as Ojibwe in Leslie's community, because some of the other communities are more isolated on reservations, while Hawaii is at the crossroads of the Pacific. However, like Native American languages, Hawaiian was also purposely repressed by the federal government. It was illegal to use the Hawaiian language in schooling from 1896 to 1986. And we were able to change that through a grassroots effort. And that may sound bad, but it was worse for American Indians and Alaska Natives. So there's a kind of a history of overcoming this suppression in part of this effort. So in Hawaii, there was a grassroots effort that developed in the late 70s to revitalize Hawaiian language and culture. It was a community-driven. It did affect the state government to provide Hawaiian as teaching in the schools, but the parents, a certain group of parents, among whom my wife and I created this nonprofit called Ahapuna Leo to start preschools or language nests taught totally in the Hawaiian language. And out of that grew what we have today, preschool, infant, toddler, in fact, all the way through to the PhD. You can go to school through the medium of Hawaiian, all the way through your compulsory education to age 18. Then we have a BA here, a Hawaiian Language College established by the state. We were established out without funding, though. We had to use our regular foreign language funding that we had for Hawaiian as a foreign language, and we developed it through student enrollments and grants to the point where we now have a PhD. We have a teacher education program taught totally through Hawaiian for certificate. Then we have an MA where they can do Indigenous language and culture education, MA, and then a PhD in Indigenous language revitalization. We have another stream we put the linguistics program, a linguistics BA in our college, and that is a way to serve other Indigenous peoples so they can go into our BA in linguistics. And at the PhD level, we have people who speak Ojibwe, Lakota, Mohawk, Tlingit from Alaska, and Inupiaq Eskimo from Alaska. We know the power of sharing together. So Leslie mentioned national legislation. All the Native American communities, including people from Hawaii, joined together in the late 1980s, and were able to pass the Native American Languages Act, which allows us to actually teach through the medium of Native American languages. So I want to tell you a little bit about what we do. Our college connected with the Ahapuna Leo nonprofit, and the efforts that nonprofit worked with the state to move children into the public school system and then charter schools. So we have a laboratory school where we demonstrate best practice in teaching through the medium of a Native American language. So we teach totally through the medium of Hawaiian from preschool all the way to grade 12. We also teach heritage languages. So the students in this school, our laboratory site, are about 98% Native Hawaiian and then other nationalities. But we live in a very multicultural, multiracial place in Hawaii. And most of the children who are Hawaiian have 2 other races and ethnicities in their background. So in order to connect with everybody, we teach Japanese for 6 years in elementary school, Chinese for 2 years in middle school. Then we have our world language, which is English, which we teach for 8 years from grade 5 through 12. All the students graduate with sufficient English proficiency to go to college in English. And we've had students in Stanford and Dartmouth and other big name colleges. We actually have a former student who's a teacher at Oxford. So they can speak English. People were worried when we started. They said they'll all be dummies. They'll never be able to graduate and they won't be able to get a job. But we have a higher high school graduation rate than regular schools, not just for Native Hawaiians who generally do poorly in school, but for the general population, we also have a higher college going rate. So this kind of language education is really important for socioeconomic reasons. It helps people in communities that are generally not, at least for Native American communities, that are generally not doing well in schools. And often the people who are drawn to it are the people from the most lower socioeconomic strata of Native communities because they're the ones who tended to be more maintaining traditions, and they haven't assimilated as much. They want to maintain their traditions. So this is really important, I think, for us to focus on. Now, I'm trying to see. I don't want you to think that we're the only program in Hawaii. We're the most developed, but we have what we call our program Hawaiian Medium, because everything is taught through Hawaiian. The administration is through Hawaiian. Testing is through Hawaiian. The operations, the janitors, everyone speaks Hawaiian. And when we started in the 1980s, there were less than 50 children proficient in Hawaiian in the state of Hawaii. Today, Hawaiian has become reported the largest non-English language spoken in the home, which is a huge change. But we know that many of the people who are reporting are just so proud of Hawaiian and using a little bit. They're probably they're not at the level that we want them to be. But again, I was going to say about other schools. So we have immersion models, which are more like your standard dual language models in other states. And then we also teach Hawaiian as a world language type of a course in high schools. And we have culture-based schools that are primarily taught through English, but they teach Hawaiian in many grades as a course. But all of them face a huge teacher education. A teacher shortage is just really over half of the school, half the positions are not filled. So we have to hire like parents or things like that to come in. It's really desperate, but we're lucky that the Native American Language Act encourages that sort of thing, but we really don't have the kind of support to develop teachers that we need. We want to I mentioned about heritage. To us, all the world is the heritage of the Native American people, because all the world has come to America. And we have a right to connect to all those people who are neighbors and relatives. So we'd like to do that, study abroad. We've even tried to do study abroad a bit with our program. We've sent a young lady to Japan to high school for 3 months. It was I would say, under the covers type thing, where we just made a deal with the school. We didn't do it with any kind of support. And also we do connections between our own Native American communities the best we can based on our own resources. So I think the Native American Languages National Coalition is a great example of grassroots working together to try to help and support each other. I want to say that it's working, it's possible, but I'm really worried about the other Native American languages, because we've been in it for 40 years. We're in a place where Native Hawaiians have more political power, so they can make a change, but many other communities don't have that sort of support. And working together, we've shown in our coalition that we can move forward. And this America's Language Initiative is like heaven sent, because everybody working together, we can really make a difference. There's a lot of knowledge about language teaching and how to move forward in the broader language community that's had a lot more experience than us, and we can greatly benefit from that. So I'm really, really pleased to be able to be a part of this. And I want to thank all the organizers, and also our state has a seal of biliteracy, and we participate in that. So it's all great. I just want to say mahalo nui loa, ya okoa pau. Thank you. And, I need to introduce Rita. I just met Rita, and I'm so grateful to her for taking on her position on the national level, take away from her school. I know how much work it is. My wife is a principal in our Hawaiian Medium Laboratory School, and I tell you, these principals and leaders really work hard, but now she's working for all of us on a national basis. So thank you, Rita.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. And I have to say thanks to you, Dick, for your organization of this panel and the structure that you put towards it, because after listening to each of my colleagues, I feel as though I'm the wrap-up person before I turn it over to Dick. Because when I think about today and the fact that we're speaking to a very broad international audience, I have to say Why the Joint National Committee for Languages, National Council for Languages and International Study? JNCL Nicholas, what do we do? So JNCL Nicholas is uniquely positioned to provide ongoing and consistent advocacy with legislators and executive branch administrative offices, as well as connecting languages and education to the broader education community in order to ensure that language learning is an integral part of discussion across all areas of learning. So as my colleagues have already spoken to in each of their presentations, we have the 5 key goal areas for the Commission on Language Learning brought forward by the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. So goal number 1 talks about increasing language teachers so that we have an opportunity for every child in every state to learn at least one language in addition to English. And so when you think about the JNCL Nicholas vision, we envision a world where the language enterprise facilitates free movement of people, information, and ideas, builds mutual understanding and acceptance of cultural and linguistic diversity, and promotes the personal development of the individual. These are very important pieces for us to think about. So JNCL was founded to ensure that Americans have the opportunity to learn English and at least one other language. So when we think about what are some of the things that we're doing, well, the Office of Abigail Spanberger brought and proposed forward the World Language Teacher Student Debt Reduction Act. Now, while it didn't go forward right now, JNCL is working to reintroduce and enact this act as part of a bigger picture going forward, because we feel that language teachers are a shortage area and they deserve comparable debt reduction, just as some of our other subject areas have. When we look at goal number 2, we think about supplementing language instruction through the education system, as Bill mentioned, through private, public partnerships among schools, government, philanthropies, businesses, and local community members, which my other colleagues talked about. How do we get these grassroots efforts to go forward? I can tell you that working collaboratively with our board of experts, as well as our director of government relations, JNCL Nicholas will continue to engage our members across the entire language enterprise and urge others in all of those areas that we've just mentioned to recognize, support, and amplify the need, which is so important for proficient language speakers. And how do we do this? With well-funded and well-articulated language programs, pre-K through higher ed and beyond into the community. So in goal 3, when we talk about supporting our heritage languages and the opportunity to move on from one generation to the next, one of the things that we're currently doing is we are working with the Coalition of Heritage Languages to support their needs. Then when we look at goal number 4, to provide targeted support and programming for Native American languages, as was previously mentioned, through the Native American Languages Act, we are working with the legislature to continue to support the development and approval of the Native American Resource Center. We are also working to coordinate with the Indian Affairs Bureau. And then when we look at goal number 5, this is something very near to my heart in the Glastonbury Public Schools, and one of the things that I wrote about in my application for exemplary programs. The idea to promote opportunities for students to learn languages in other countries by experiencing other cultures and immersing themselves in multilingual environments. So way back, we had the National Security Education Program come to our district for one of their meetings. And one of the things we asked for was more opportunities for high school students, not just higher ed students, undergraduates and graduate programs, to be involved. And so we do offer in Glastonbury a very small model of a reciprocal 2-week international exchange program with competitive applications to give students that immersive opportunity and whet their appetite for future learning. I would just say I would encourage all of our attendees today and the broader community to sign up for our new Legislative Action Center, where you can receive alerts and notices. I thank my executive committee and my board for their hard work, and I thank all of you for moving us forward in the language profession. Thank you. Dick?
Thank you so much, Rita. I am sharing my screen. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Excellent. This is our website. And I'm going to, it's a work in progress. It's not quite a minimal viable product, but it still needs work, but you'll see what we're aiming to do. We're aiming to highlight what we can do now at a grassroots level so that we can move forward showing how other programs can model some of these practices and showing how funders can make good choices. And so here is an introduction on the website to the content, purpose, qualifications, nomination, application, and selection process. All of that information is there so that you can get your program, or you can nominate someone else's program to be in this data set. And these programs will be featured as we go along. But but right at this moment, we have, with only a few days to begin, about 30 programs already approved and another dozen or so waiting. And so and they all come through this website. Now, if you go to About, and you can see, we give a broad kind of background, if you will, on what we are in what language is in the United States. And we talk about that in our goals and our ambitions. We also talk about this specific initiative and its funders. Mellon, in particular, the Mellon Foundation has enabled us to do this. These are all of the, this is the background of and the history of what we've been doing. And I'm rushing, so stay with me. And the team that's doing this is the working group. And here's a list of the people in the working group, and you'll see they represent government, federal, state. They represent industry, education, Native and heritage communities, as well as NGOs concerned with education and international and social justice. And then we have our fellows, and this is the 150 and counting experts from around the country who nominate these programs. And we have a new university home. This has not been entered, although it's established at the University of Texas at Austin, which will house this website. But let me get immediately to the guide. This is how you come in. You say you come into the main site and you click the guide, and this is what you get. It's an introduction to what we're doing, why we're doing it, and so on. And it tells you what the content is. It covers all languages, all educational levels, pre-K to university, graduate, and professional programs, all student ambitions from exposure, professional to professional, all levels, beginning to expert, all accredited institutions, public, private, tribal, religious, and for-profit that are accredited, and so on. And you see all of it, and you see the purpose of the guide. It's stated here, when you come in, what we're trying to do is show other programs around the country what can be emulated for success, and to show funders what best to do and what best to fund it. But if you want to see, though, how this all works, we go to Explore the Guide. And here you have the option to say, I want to look at pre-K, I want to look at pre-K-12, I want to look at higher education, I want to look at community, school, or programs. And just give you a sample. Let's say there's Glastonbury, a wonderful program that Rita has established. And since she's so good about talking about that, I'll let her talk about that later. Let me show you something. These are the programs now that are in here. Let's look at something at Baton Rouge. What you see when you explore this site, it gives you the information. There was a write-up on when you first came in, and this is K-12, and this write-up is here in this description that the program writes. And here are some data from the program that we collect. It's where is it located, what level, a large city, elementary school, free and reduced lunch, 100%, which is very interesting. Minority students, total 56%. African American primarily, but Hispanic and Native American, Native Hawaiian, small numbers. These are the languages they teach. These are the languages offered. But the themes is what we're focused on from the initial report of the American Academy. How do they improve access? And here's a description of how they improve access to students. Here's a description of how they improve access to less commonly taught or neglected languages. And this is how they do it. And this data is collected for everyone who comes in. They do this through community outreach, parent outreach, and so on, and business internships. How do they recruit minority and disadvantaged? They do targeted minority recruitment programs, school visits, social media, print materials. How do they increase effectiveness? And here's a way they increase the effectiveness. Not only do we want access, but we want the access to effective programs. And here they do language proficiency testing. What is their assessment? They use Stamp and Delft and so on, and which is very interesting. How do they promote teaching? These are our themes: access, excellence, and then the themes from the American Academy. What do they do for teachers? And how do they recruit? What are the qualifications? What about certification? And what is the percentage of full-time teachers who are credentialed, pre-service development, in-service development, and so on, professional development? This is how they handle that, and so on. If we go to how do they maintain partnerships? Another theme in this whole website and in this America's Languages American Academy report, the types of partnerships they have with local schools, parent-teachers associations, heritage communities, state, dual language immersion. How do they deal with the state, heritage communities, state, and so on? These are the partnerships that they do. What are the benefits they get from partnerships with heritage communities and so on? And then you go down to key achievements of the partnerships, fine, and so on. Let's go to another theme. And so we go to support heritage language programs. This is what they do to support heritage language community programs. They do not have any role in Native American as yet. And maybe that's not there isn't their mission. And here's the overseas immersion. This is an example of a K-12 school that you search, that's an example of what's going to be in this program. Let's look very quickly at a higher education one. Let's look at, here's a higher education. And by the way, you can look down and you can search by breakdown of minorities, the classes offered, and all of these variables you may search by. But give you an example again of higher education, what the website looks like. It is basically the description again, the languages offered, the themes. Here's how they improve access this way. And you can see all the things we document, increased effectiveness. These are the things they do, and we document it through this application questionnaire and so on. And all the way through these themes that you see: promote teaching excellence. This is what they do with the teachers. Non-tenured, tenure track teachers, 44%. Non-tenured, 56%. If you want to know, highest degree, PhD, 72%. Teacher ratio, student ratio, 1 to 20. This is the kind of information we have in this site. And we have these three categories: educational level, pre-K, higher education, and community school or program. And these are where our Native American, our community schools come in, and they list their programs. And again, you can see what kind of programs they have, where they're located, their monicity. We're very interested in that, the type of school, and so on. All of this is in the guide. And we encourage everyone who's looking at all of this to basically, if you have a program that you run, or if you have a program that you know about, please nominate them or apply through this guide. And now let me turn it over to all of my colleagues. for a final word. We're running quite late, so if we have a final word from my colleague, please jump in.
I just want to say thank you to everybody for all the work you're doing for languages in the world, and I look forward to good things to come.
Bill.
And I'd like to thank everyone who participated, everyone who's watching, who's advocated for the seal, whose advocacy starts wherever you are, doing what you do well and with passion, whether you're teaching, whether you're leading an organization, whether you're a researcher or some combination, or a student or a teacher. But we want folks to put programs into the site so that we can go back and show the rest of the world, yeah, we're doing it, and that we can connect
Leslie,
other
a
people
last
together
word.
who want to do it.
Miigwech ka kinaginawa. Thanks to everyone, and to repeat that as well. The guide gives us an opportunity to learn more, to connect more, and to share a lot of our information, but to uphold and highlight what is happening out here in America with America's languages. And I think we talk about that a lot. We don't want our Native American languages to be invisible. We don't want any of America's languages to be invisible or shuffled off to the side. So this guide gives us a way to shine a light into those spaces. So please, folks, do nominate programs, schools, community language programs at americaslanguages.com.
Thank you. I did forget to mention that. Thank you,
americaslanguages.org.
Leslie. Pila, quick word.
Okay, Amalo, thank you very much. You guys already said it, but I think I'll thank the parents. The parents who are putting their kids in these programs, trusting in the teachers and the work of everybody. And we're going to work even harder and do even a better job, and we're all working together. So keep on sending your kids to the programs.
Thank you, Pila. Quick word, Rita.
Again, I kicked this off and said thank you. Please advocate, sign up for the Legislative Action Center, sign up for our news brief, tweet it, social media, get out there. The power of one person makes a big difference.
Thank you. Thank you all. And to all of my colleagues in education and to all the stakeholders, we are opening up language education where it always should be, have been, to everyone. Whether they're in marginalized communities or in elite schools, we want everyone involved in this. We want all of America's languages because we believe that's the way to let language education in the United States be established in a way it has never been established and accepted before. Thank you all very much. And thank you. And by the way, there is the global seal of biliteracy as well as the state seal of biliteracy, which helps sponsor the global seal. Enabon has sponsored this entity. So enterprise. So thank you all. And I'll say goodbye for all of us. Thank you.